Is the Arctic territory of Greenland a part of North America? Let's rejoin Professor Robert Rix from the University of Copenhagen to trace the long history of settlement in Greenland.
1867, and numbers are very interesting parallels at this time because the U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward, who had just negotiated the purchase of Alaska for the U.S., he also has his eyes on 3 Danish islands, the West Indies. So that's St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. And that's been Danish colonies and been part of the triangular trade, trading sugar and slaves, but were no longer profitable at this point. So there's this idea that the US could purchase these 3 islands from Denmark. And in this annexation frenzy, both Greenland and Iceland entered the discussion as a kind of way to gild the expansionist lily. And a report is produced at this time for the US government and also published. And this is gushing over resources. So there's fishing, there's coal, and there's a mineral called cryolite, which becomes very important. But there's another thing that's an echo of history. And this is also a point here in the report, because the report says that if Greenland could be bought for the US, it would induce what's called a peaceful and cheerful handing over of what's now Canada to the US, because it would be sandwiched between Alaska, Greenland, and the US. So this would surely make Canada a state of the US. It doesn't come to anything because the purchase of the 3 West Indies or the West Indian islands falls through. And at that point, it's seen as Greenland would probably not happen either. So an offer is never really made. There's a growing American interest throughout the early 20th century, an interest in Greenland. And to begin with, again, the theme is resources, but increasingly it becomes security. So we know that in 1910, at least, security takes center stage. There's at this time a fear among the Americans that Prussian expansion may lead to a takeover of Denmark. And that would also mean the takeover of the 3 West Indian islands. And since this is very close to the Panama Canal, it's thought that it would be a good idea to buy the West Indies. Now, the calculus is that the Danes should be sweetened into selling the West Indies, so it doesn't fall into the hands of Germany. So there's this scheme, which is quite intricate, which is that Denmark should give over Greenland to the US. In return, Denmark should receive a southern group of islands in the Philippines. Denmark should then surrender these islands to Germany, because Germany had an interest in becoming a leading power in that part of Asia. In return, Germany should give back to Denmark the northern part of Schleswig, which they had lost. So this is the idea. And after that, if the Americans could set this in motion, they thought that that would sweeten the Danes to then sell the West Indian islands. Again, because that would mean that they could keep control of the Panama Canal. And they aren't sold at this time in 1910, but they are sold in 1917. And this is again a fear during the First World War that this could be used for German submarines. A submarine station could be constructed there. So in January 1917, the Danish government sells these islands to the United States for 25 million kroner. And there's an interesting thing here because one of the conditions for selling the West Indies is that the US should acknowledge Denmark's right to Greenland. And US falls short of ever doing that. But this was really part of the original demands, but it's never effected. It's never manifested in what happened at the time. 1917, Greenland is still very much on the agenda. We had a few records of this, and we know that rumors were still bandied about that US would potentially buy Greenland at some point. So in 1930, the Danish Prime Minister, Torkel Stauning, comes out actually saying very publicly, Greenland is not for sale. So there's a kind of continuing interest from America in buying Greenland for security reasons. Cryolite, which is this rare mineral, which has been mined in Greenland and commercially mined until 1987. Cryolite is used in the production of aluminium. And this becomes very important in the 20th century and certainly during the Second World War because it's used for manufacturing of fighter planes, for instance. So there's a huge trade with the US. And after Denmark is invaded by Germany in 1940, it becomes very important to protect that production of cryolite. The Danish ambassador to the US, he goes rogue because he strikes this deal with the US that the US could come in and protect the Danish colonies. This is obviously not what the Danish government wants at this time. They've been occupied by Germany, so they can't agree to this. But US servicemen travel to Greenland and protect especially the Krylite mine, but also some of the stations there, the airports. The fix there is that they basically resign from service and they then sign up as volunteers to create this fiction that the US is not, in fact, invading Greenland. They do protect the mine there, the production of Krylite, which should not fall into the hands of the German. They also use the air bases there. So Greenland will be a hub for refueling from at least 10,000 planes during World War II landed in Greenland. There's also a place from where you could protect the ships going to Europe. So it becomes a very important place, Greenland. And one other twist maybe is what's called the weather war. Basically on the East Coast, there were weather stations because being able to forecast the weather was extremely important for knowing when to launch a mission. It was also used for D-Day, obviously, just a few days where the climate was clement enough to launch that mission. But throughout the years of the war, there were German clandestine weather stations. Then the Danes, US, established other weather stations so they could forecast the weather. Some skirmishes there that would shoot at each other, and that's known as the weather war. So for many reasons, tactical reasons, Greenland was extremely important during the Second World War and basically given over as a US protectorate during the time when the Danish government was hamstrung. The US at this time already realizes that Greenland is extremely important. In 1946, the Secretary of State offers them $100 million. This is under the Truman administration. They flirted with the idea of swapping Greenland for some of the oil-rich land in Alaska. Never came through, and this has been kept a secret until recently. What you have in Greenland at the moment is what's the feeder-thick space base, which was formerly better known as the Thule Air Base on the northwest coast, built in 1951. And that still serves as an early warning station for ballistic missiles. It also tracks satellites, hence the name, Space Base. And it also aims to track, and this becomes increasingly significant as the ice is melting in the Arctic, to monitor Chinese and Russian ships off the coast. So yes, this base is very much part of American security. If we go back and to look at the Danish and Greenlandic interests, the constitutional arrangement, Greenland is a colony of Denmark until 1953, when Greenland is incorporated into the Danish state. So this is something that's maintained to this day. There's what's called the unity of the Danish realm, really consists of three entities. So the Denmark proper, the mainland Denmark, there's Greenland, and there's the Faroe Islands. And in 1953, basically Greenland becomes a province. But the unity of the realm, in 1979, Greenland is granted home rule, and that's expanded in 2009 to become self-rule. That means that Denmark, or the Danish government, has very little, if any, say in domestic issues in Greenland. So Denmark should sell Greenland. And that's simply not for Denmark to sell. Greenland is completely devolved. The Greenland Parliament has 31 members. So selling Greenland would first entail a discussion between Greenland and Denmark about whether there should be independence. Then independence should be ratified by some kind of referendum. And then the Greenlanders should decide to sell themselves to America. So the constitutional setup here is not for Denmark to sell Greenland. It's simply as impossible as it would be for Westminster to sell Scotland without any involvement of Holyrood. As of 2009, Greenland is given away to achieve independence. Denmark also signed the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention in 1996, which acknowledges the Inuit as a people and therefore also the inherent right to self-determination. So it's basically in the agreement that if the Greenlanders want independence, they can have it. And I think this is the trajectory. This is what the Greenland people want. At least 4 out of 5 political parties in Greenland want independence. The problem is it'll be a bit of a rocky road simply because of the economy. So unless Greenland pivots the economy, perhaps with American investments in mining, it'll be very difficult. The Greenland economy is propped up by Danish block grants to the tune of 5.7 billion Danish kroner, which is equivalent of 84 million pounds. So it's quite significant for a population of 57,000 people. So it will be difficult to achieve independence straight away, but I think that is the long-term prospect for many Greenlanders.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.